Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in online, and for all of you who are joining here in person in The Hague, the seat of the International Criminal Court. My name is Brandon Silver, and I'm an international human rights lawyer at the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, which has been serving as advocates, championing the cases and causes of the hostages taken captive in the heinous attacks of October 7th, which claimed over 1,200 lives, and where 250 innocent people of over 40 different nationalities have been taken hostage, and many of whom remain in captivity. While these crimes were inspired by Hamas's genocidal anti-Semitism as reflected in their founding charter, make no mistake, it affects all of humanity. Over 40 nationalities were indeed affected, and the most basic, fundamental of human values and international norms were breached. I am joined here today by colleagues of the international legal team that has just filed an information brief of over 1,000 pages of legal analysis, of evidence that we believe will serve as a strong foundation for advancing the investigation of the court and the issuing of arrest warrants against the perpetrators of these heinous crimes. It's important to remember that these crimes are still ongoing. As we meet in this room today, there are many hostages who continue to experience the crimes described in this brief: the rape, the torture, the extrajudicial executions. They are calling out for justice. They are calling out for the international community to take action. The brief here points out the facts in the law that describe these cases, and it's a lot more than just facts and law. We must remember that this case is not just about laws, but about human lives. It's not just about how we litigate, but about how we live, who we are as a people, who we are as humanity. And if there was ever a case the International Criminal Court was meant to address, it is the heinous atrocities. I want to introduce Iris Haggai Liniato, the daughter of Judith Weinstein and Gadi Haggai, who were brutally murdered and whose bodies, in breach of international law, are still being held. Iris speaks on behalf of all the victims represented in this legal brief, who are calling for justice for their loved ones and for those still being held. Iris.
Hi, my name is Iris Weinstein Haggai. Both of my parents, Judy Weinstein Haggai, Gadi Haggai, they were both brutally murdered and taken hostage by Hamas. I'm from Kibbutz Nir Oz. Kibbutz Nir Oz has about 400 people. A quarter of them are either held hostage or murdered. And I wanted to take a moment and explain why this submission means so much to me, to my family, to all of the families and all of the hostages. Kibbutz Nir Oz is an architectural culture that I had really a privilege to grow up in. I know every family there, every person there is a part of my being, every person there is a part of my childhood, my youth, my teens. I know every house there, I know every corner there. I know the houses there were burnt, I know the people that were burnt alive, I know people who were massacred, I know all of the people who are still held hostage, and this is for justice, which should be acknowledged, and hopefully justice will be made to honor all my friends who were murdered and that are held hostage currently. On October 7th, my parents, just like any other day, took their daily walk together outside in the beautiful Israeli, southern Israeli farmer fields, potato growing. It's just a beautiful place. They love taking walks every day together. I don't live in Israel, and I saw that at 6:45 there were many red alerts in my kibbutz. I immediately spoke to my parents. I asked them what's going on, and I expected them to be, kind of usual about it. It's unfortunately nothing new that we're being bombed. It's been going on for many, many, many years. But they told me they were laying face down and that they are seeing hundreds of rockets over their heads. I told them to tell me when they were back home, and in the meantime I spoke to my friends who live in the kibbutz, and they basically told me that terrorists were coming in their houses, they're going door to door, killing, murdering, and that was the last I ever heard from my parents. A few weeks after, I discovered a call that my mom made to MADA, which is like an Israeli Red Cross, and she describes very graphically that my dad was shot in the head, and she was shot in her face and her arm by terrorists on 2 motorcycles, and that she's asking for help. She obviously sounded very, very distressed, but she was still able to call for help. She wasn't able to receive that help because they shot the ambulance in the kibbutz. They put it on fire. And that's the last thing I knew of my mom for weeks. Then a deal was made, and Hamas agreed to release all women and children. And every night we would wait for this list that Hamas releases, and hoping that my mom's name would be on the list. And every night we would wait, and she was never on the list. Very, very excited to see that other women and children that I knew were on the list. But you can't help but feeling that black hole of, okay, but what's going on with my mom? Why isn't she on the list? She's the perfect candidate. And after 79 days, we got the official announcement that my dad was murdered and taken hostage into Gaza. And after 83 days, we received the same announcement about my mother. She was also murdered and taken hostage by Hamas. And it's been 131 days. They are still held hostage, along with many of my friends, many of my community, many of other hostages who were taken from a peace music party, other kibbutzes that I went to school with many of people from those communities. And the people who are currently held hostage are people who believed in a 2-state solution. They believed in living side by side. They believed in peace. They were peace activists. They were about mindfulness. My mother taught mindfulness to children, to teenagers, to cope with the stress we've been dealing with for 20 years. She's been doing everything she can to ensure that children, even though they are raised in a stressful environment, they are taught and given the tools to become better people, and understanding that all people are equal and that everybody deserves a chance to be happy, to live in peace. And these people are currently held hostage, which is crazy. They are held hostage in horrific, horrific, horrific conditions. They are being raped. They are being held in cages. There is a huge underground tunnel infrastructure that is hiding people, humans, in horrific, horrific conditions. And this submission is so important so we can get them out. And hopefully try to avoid other horrific situations like this in the future. So this submission, I feel, helps to start to bring justice and arrest the Hamas terrorists who captured my parents, who captured my friends, who captured all the hostages, and everybody who was involved in the October 7th massacre. I want to thank everyone that's involved. I want to thank the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and for really making this happen and hopefully helping all of us get one step closer to a better world where things like this and where my family don't need to raise our children into a world like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Iris, for your courage and resilience and for being here today to be the voice of all those who don't have one, for speaking out for those who can't speak, and for articulating this double crime, those who are, the greatest champions of humanity, who are, representing the best of humanity, of peace, are experiencing the worst of inhumanity. And we appreciate you being here today in The Hague. And our next speaker is Michelle Butler of Matrix Chambers, leading barrister globally and one of the world's foremost international criminal law practitioners with extensive experience before the ICC. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Brandon. The heinous crimes that were committed on the 7th of October 2023, which are continuing even today, are crimes which shock the conscience of humanity. They include hostage-taking, enforced disappearances, murder, imprisonment, torture, persecution, rape, and grave acts of sexual violence. These are specific offences which are prescribed by Articles 7 and 8 of the Statute of the International Criminal Court. They were committed on a large-scale basis, and they were the subject of months of detailed planning by Hamas and by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. In short, they were widespread and systematic crimes directed against a civilian population. This means that as a matter of law, they amount to both war crimes and crimes against humanity. Although the victims of these crimes include citizens of approximately 40 different states, we must never forget that this is the second time in living memory that the Jewish people have been the subject of crimes against humanity committed on a mass scale. Put simply, these crimes are ripe for prosecution before the International Criminal Court. It is the apex judicial body which was specifically conceived to hold perpetrators accountable for the most serious crimes of concern to the international community as a whole. We trust that the ICC prosecutor and his team will be aided in their investigation of these crimes by the extensive dossier of evidence that we have submitted today. More than anything, the victims look forward to their family members being brought home and the perpetrators being brought to justice.
Thank you, Michelle, for lending your experience and expertise to this case, for leading this cause and for sharing your insights into the granular detail of the brief. Pour ceux et celles qui nous joignent en français, je donne la parole à mon collègue Dona Levy, une représentative de notre centre à Wallenberg, qui a été engagée en profondeur avec les familles qui ont été ciblées par ces atrocités. Et je cite la parole, elle est une ancienne exécutive dans le milieu de d'engagement avec les communautés et avec des gouvernements. Elle est vraiment une bénévole qui a donné sa cœur et sa âme à engager en profondeur avec toutes les familles qui étaient ciblées et peut discuter de ces détails qui est à la base, à la fondation de notre soumission.
Merci. It's been 131 days mothers have been wanting, eager to embrace their children and unable to do so, not knowing where they are and if they're alive. Grandchildren growing up without their grandparents, in order to ensure that everyone gets a deep understanding of the historical milestone we're leading this week. I will make my statement in French. Cela fait 131 jours aujourd'hui, depuis le 7 octobre, quand des centaines de terroristes ont massacré plus de 1200 personnes et ont pris en otage 251 hommes, femmes, enfants, bébés. 131 jours que des mamans veulent embrasser leurs enfants mais ne savent pas s'ils sont vivants ou où ils sont. 131 jours que des jeunes femmes sont violées, encore maintenant, et terrorisées. 131 jours de crimes qui sont toujours en cours. Bien que ces crimes soient motivés par l'antisémitisme, génocide exprimé dans la charte du Hamas, ils touchent l'humanité tout entière. Les personnes touchées par les crimes représentent plus de 40 nationalités différentes et toutes les religions. Le Centre Raoul Wallenberg pour les droits de la personne, basé au Canada, agit au nom de tous les otages. Cette semaine marque un moment historique pour l'humanité tout entière. Pour la première fois, après 4 mois, nous avons déposé un mémoire de 1000 pages auprès de la Cour pénale internationale. 1000 pages de preuves et d'analyses juridiques, accompagnées de vidéos prises en grande partie par les terroristes eux-mêmes. Ce mémoire aidera le prosécuteur et le procureur général de la Cour pénale internationale, Karim Khan, à faire avancer son enquête. Ce mémoire fournit des preuves irréfutables qui serviront de base à une demande de mandat d'arrêt. Je veux remercier toutes les personnes qui ont contribué à ce travail et merci encore au Centre Raoul Wallenberg qui est présidé par professeur Erwin Kotler, qui était lui-même procureur général du Canada et qui était ancien ministre de la Justice. Merci et bon courage à tous, à toute l'humanité.
Merci Dona pour cet discours émouvant au nom de toutes les familles que vous engagez avec. And thank you for underscoring how this case speaks to the very foundation of our common humanity. I'm going to call upon Yuval Sasson next, who is one of Israel's leading litigators, a former deputy in the Attorney General's office, one of Israel's top international law experts and practitioners, and the legal counsel to the Forum of Families of Hostages and Missing Persons, which is the key partner in this brief. This is a joint brief from the Forum of the Families and from the Rollenberg Center, and Yuval is legal counsel to the Forum. And on behalf of Pro Bono, working on behalf of the Meitar law firm, one of Israel's leading law firms, with an excellent team that contributed significantly to this historic submission. Yuval.
Thank you, Brendan. The forum came out of the ashes of October 7th morning. People were starting to look for their dearest. At the beginning, it encompassed over 1,000 people, which were looking for the dearest, which were missing and high. And later on, unfortunately, many of them, it became apparent that they were killed and butchered on October 7th. And others, so many other souls were taken into Gaza. And so many others are still there. And we're fighting on their behalf. We're advocating their situation. We're advocating for their safe and fast return home. We had the honor of having the prosecutor, Mr. Karim Khan, visit us as a guest of the forum in Israel. I had the opportunity, and Brandon accompanied me in that tour down south to visit the communities, to see the ruined places, to go into the burned kindergartens, to see the death, to feel the death, to smell it almost 2 months after October 7. It was apparent that in the kibbutz Be'eri, in Kfar Aza, at the site of the Rei Nova Festival, that the prosecutor was extremely touched. It was also apparent that he is seeking justice and that he, together with us, sees his role as bringing justice. But the prosecutor is an independent body, and the prosecutor's office is an independent body and a professional body. And we understand that. And given that situation, and given the complexity of the prosecutor arriving into Israel and actually collecting evidence on his behalf and by his team, we promised him to do whatever we can in order to assist and facilitate his investigation. And thankfully, with the team that I have around me, which is the best team that we could actually have for the hostages, we have been working day and night in order to build up this dossier, this brief that was submitted to him. And we are standing here, and our promise and our commitment to the families and to all the victims, that we will not rest until we finalize our mission to support the investigation of the prosecutor and to see justice, and hopefully in a swift manner, because 138 days after, and every ticking minute is a minute that we may be losing another life in Gaza, and we really ran out of time. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Yuval, for sharing that on behalf of the Forum of Families, on behalf of your outstanding team, and underscoring the sense of urgency of every ticking minute and of the trust and cooperation being placed in the office of the prosecutor following the historic first ever visit of an ICC prosecutor in a solidarity, non-investigative visit with the families that was spearheaded by the families and by you and your team as part of this partnership, and where we trust that your ongoing leadership as a part of this will continue this important effort before the court. And I will now ask Samantha Rosenthal of Sullivan and Cromwell, which is counsel to the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and the Families, along with Michelle Butler, and worked tirelessly as part of this team on the brief to please share a statement on behalf of Sullivan and Cromwell and all those partners and counsel that participated, including some of the top former anti-terrorism prosecutors and experts of the U.S. Department of Justice, counsel to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and many of the U.S.'s greatest minds in the private sector. Thank you, Samantha, for the work that your firm has contributed.
Thank you, Brendan. We are honored to be representing our client, the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, in filing this historic submission, which provides horrifying evidence of the atrocities committed by Hamas. As the submission details, the October 7th attacks not only violated the basic dignity of the victims, but also amounted to war crimes and crimes against humanity. We stand with our client in calling for the immediate and safe release of the hostages who remain in captivity. We hope our efforts today will play a part in bringing the perpetrators of the October 7th attacks to justice.
Thank you, Samantha. And Professor Kotler, who founded and chairs our center, regrettably, due to health reasons, was unable to join us in The Hague today, but His leadership and his experience and expertise underpins the entirety of this initiative. As Canada's former Minister of Justice and Attorney General, he made the pursuit of international criminal justice a priority of the Canadian government, and it was under his leadership that the first ever universal jurisdiction prosecutions took place in Canada. It was under his leadership that historic legislation was passed, including, even as a longtime member of Parliament, being one of the co-sponsors of the Canadian enabling statutes enforcing the Rome Statute. He was one of the co-founders of the International Criminal Court. He chaired the Interparliamentary Association of collectively bringing together all the legislators around the world to champion the creation of the court, and was the special advisor to the Canadian government on its establishment. And had also, in the past, served as international legal counsel to hostages and political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela and Anatoly Sharansky. So with this unique background in representing both complex and compelling political prisoner and hostage cases, and of being a founding leader within international criminal justice in general, and the International Criminal Court in particular, this is something that is of the utmost priority, and which we are delighted that he is leading on behalf of the Centre and the families. I would now ask for any questions that the press may or public may have for the panel.
Could you please explain what is the actual goal of the brief that was submitted to the ICC earlier today?
Thank you very much for that timely and important question. The focus of the brief is to support the investigation of the prosecutor to achieve international arrest warrants, justice for victims, and accountability for violators. And I would call on my colleagues to comment in that regard.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Yes, so the aim of the information brief was to provide a dossier of comprehensive evidence for the prosecutor to assist in his investigation. He and his esteemed team have been working extremely hard to date on the investigation, but they have called for collaboration with NGOs, with individuals, with persons on the ground to provide additional evidence to assist him in attaining the very high evidential threshold that he has to meet in order to secure arrest warrants.
Thank you, Michelle. Are there any other questions?
What is the Centre's position on the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court?
Thank you. The brief makes the argument that, as per the decision of the pre-trial chamber, that criminal prosecution authority was delegated by the Palestinian Authority to the International Criminal Court, and that pursuant to this, despite it being significantly contested by a number of states that are leading members of the Rome Statute, the majority of the pre-trial chamber did indeed find that there is jurisdiction on the matter, but in important and well-founded dissent and a point of contention on the broader PTC decision in general is what is the territorial scope of that jurisdiction. It's important to recall that Israel is not a member of the court, that therefore those questions are challenging. There's ongoing dynamics that add to the complexities of determining that, and therefore that is why the PTC had clearly stated that this creation of legal jurisdiction is notwithstanding political negotiations, questions of sovereignty, that it's purely a question of criminal jurisdiction, and that it is unsure as to what part of the territory it applies to. So the effect of that, in brief, means that there is jurisdiction over Palestinian nationals for the crimes that were committed. There is no complementarity for the crimes that Hamas has committed. So there is jurisdiction to move forward, expeditiously because there is no other body that will investigate the crimes that have been committed. And on the other hand, there is, according to the PTC, some important questions as to jurisdiction regarding Israel or Israelis. And Israel is not a member of the court. A number of states challenge that position, and that ultimately, if indeed it was determined that there was certain geographic scope that would allow for that, complementarity is still an important component to bear in mind, that as the prosecutor himself acknowledged in the statement released following the solidarity visit, that Israel has an independent legal system that can address any allegations that are made.
If I can ask a related question?
Yes.
And what's the relation between the brief you filed at the ICC and the ongoing matters at the ICJ?
So, you probably want to take that?
Yeah, happy to take that. So two comments on that. We're talking about two different tribunals, separate. One deals with relationship between countries and responsibility of states, and the other, the International Criminal Court, which the submission was actually presented to, is a court of individuals. Also, the matters that they deal with are different altogether. So it's not the same tribunals, it's not the same jurisdiction, it's not the same matters. So that's the first comment. Similarly to that, neither the forum or the center represent any state. We represent victims. We represent families of victims. We do not stand on behalf of any state, and we do not represent any state. So it's individual victims trying to assist or aiming to assist the work of the Office of the Prosecutor in its investigation into individual responsibility of perpetrators rather than matters between states.
Thank you very much, Yuval. Are there any other questions? I see
Yes.
you have one.
Yes. What are the next steps in this process that you have initiated today?
Sure. Thank you for asking, and I think our lead ICC
Yes.
specialist is best placed to speak to the next steps.
So the next steps are that we are hoping and trusting that the prosecutor, who has been working very hard on their investigation to date, will soon be ready to apply to the pretrial chamber for authorization for an arrest warrant. Once he gathers sufficient evidence to do so, he's enabled to make an application to the judges, and the judges will then decide, if they feel that there's sufficient evidence, that there is an opportunity to issue authorization for an arrest warrant. At that point, we would very much hope that all of the different state parties to the court statute would cooperate in facilitating either the surrender or the arrest of the perpetrators.
Thank you, Michelle. I see another question.
And what do you think the effect of arrest warrants will be on the current situation if they're issued?
Well, thank you very much for asking that. And, ultimately, arrest warrants send an important signal that for the heinous crimes that Iris described, and that is representative of atrocities, as Michelle said, that are committed on a widespread and systematic scale, that their voices are being heard, that those crimes are being addressed, and that ultimately international law, international justice means something. That would be the effect of warrants. And in a practical way, it would tell those perpetrators that the world is watching, that one day, and hopefully that day will come soon, there will be justice served, and that they will see the inside of a courtroom for the crimes they've committed. Does anybody else want to address that point?
I think it's worthwhile, maybe, Donna, to refer to the other measures that are being taken, because this is not standing alone, just the arrest warrants. There are other measures, legal measures, and other pressures that the Roel Wallenberg and the Forum have been working on, and maybe you want to address that because you've been very involved in all of those.
Sure, gladly. So we know from the history of humanity that in order to dismantle a terrorist organization, military action is far from being enough. We know that only by engaging in sanctions, by preventing resources and money to reach those perpetrators and the organization, only by issuing arrest warrants, only by the community of nations joining together and using the tools at their disposal will actually be able, as a humanity, to make sure that we prevent these actions from repeating themselves, not only in Israel, but everywhere on the planet. And that is exactly what the Raoul Wallenberg Center is engaging on by engaging in sanction submission, by encouraging and supporting nations. We mentioned that there are 40 nations and civilians involved that were touched by these crimes against humanity, for all these nations to open investigation in their own jurisdictions, etc., etc. So we're very grateful for anyone who's taken action and for choosing to be on the right side of history. Thank you.
I'll just add to that, if I may. So the other result of issuing arrest warrants will be not only that individual countries will put forward a sanctions regime in relation to named individuals, but also that those individuals' travel movements will be severely restricted in the future, because they will be very hesitant to travel to countries which are state parties to the ICC because of the risk of being surrendered and transferred to the court. So yes, from that point of view, there is a real operational restriction on the role of Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which would result from the issuance of arrest warrants, and we think that that would be important for the victims.
Thank you very much. And unless there's any other questions, I believe that this concludes the press briefing on the recent filing of this 1,000-page brief on behalf of victims in a partnership between the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and the families of hostages and missing persons forum, with the support of counsel Michelle Butler of Matrix Chambers and Sullivan and Cromwell. Thank you again for all those who joined in person and online.